Welcome to the Property Pendulum, brought to you by Domain and Fear and Greed, the podcast that tells you which way the property market is going to swing and how to make the most of it. I'm Michael Thompson, and I'm joined, as always, by Alice Stolz, National Property Editor at Domain and one of Australia's foremost experts on all things real estate, known to audiences around the country for her work on Nine, including The Block. Hi, Alice.
Hello, Michael. Great to be here.
Today's topic is a great one, and it's one that anyone who spends some time looking at property listings would have seen this language popping up. Today, we are looking at what that property listing is really telling you. The language used in a listing can be full of hints, can't it? It's not just about the size of the property and not just about kind of how much sun it gets, all that kind of thing, but about the price that you might actually end up paying for it. So today we're going to decode some of the language so that you can hopefully spot some of the opportunities and maybe avoid some of the pitfalls as well. So we're putting together a bit of a list. Let's jump straight into number one, mortgagee or kind of distressed listings. If you see mortgagee pop up in a property listing, what does that mean?
So this is probably the most obvious one that gives you a sense of where the seller is at. Now, that seller in that case, if it's mortgagee, could actually be the bank. But a distress listing will also imply an owner is under financial distress, unfortunately for them, and that opportunity presents itself that basically they're going to have to just take whatever offer they can get. So I think for a lot of people, when they see those words, they have a sense of the pressure that the seller and or the vendor, just in case it's not the actual owner, is under and does need to sell no matter what.
And I suppose with kind of interest rates relatively high, there is a greater risk that we will start seeing more of these listings coming through.
That's right. Look, I think people predicted the mortgage cliff, which didn't quite eventuate in the way that people expected it to, but we definitely are still seeing an increase on mortgagee or distress listings pop up in certain parts of the market. So that there was a lot of expectation that we'd see a big onslaught of listings like this. That hasn't happened, but there are definitely certain areas in every capital city where people are feeling that pinch, and you will see words such as mortgagee and distressed filter through.
And do they typically go to auction, those ones, or is it just the same as any normal listing whereby you may have an opportunity to buy it before it goes to auction?
It can happen in either case. It depends on how the seller wants to proceed, basically. Look, I think also it's reflective of what the market's doing at that time. And I think if there is heat in that market, as we've touched on, certain states around Australia at the moment are still quite strong, and they're probably the ones that would take it to auction, knowing you are going to have a lot more competition, hopefully, for that home come auction day.
Now, the next one on the list, Alice, is a deceased estate. Now, this can go either way, can't it? Where you would think that perhaps you might be able to pick up a bit of a bargain here. It might be kind of something that hasn't been touched for 40 years and just kind of has been lived in by one person for that entire period. But you could end up kind of in the middle of a family feud, right?
That's right. These are sort of often the ones that I think can trip people up, and it happens because a deceased estate normally means that often the children or the offspring of the owner are the people selling that house. Now, in many cases, that is a number of siblings rallying together to get that deal done. Now, particularly if the family's a bit sort of acrimonious and relationships aren't great between the siblings, the way it's often done is the valuation will be done for the property, and that will often be at kind of below market rate, like what it will have to sell at, I guess. So you will often see a lower price there than what you would see from a normal person selling their normal house and wanting to make money out of it. And that's because price guide wise, it's going to sell no matter what. Now, the issue often with the deceased estate is not only that it's luring you in with this price, which if there's competition will probably go well over that.
Yeah.
But the other issue is, and this is where it gets really thorny come auction day, is that you've often got, let's really enjoy this moment, 6 siblings in the dining room battling it out for, do we sell, do we wait, do we keep pushing up the auctioneer to get more in? And before you know it, you've got, as you mentioned, family feud like taking over and siblings just going all out for the money effectively. And the issue is that it can go on and on and on, because often it's very hard to have agreement between a pool of parties. And often these are the sort of people who actually would really benefit from having probably a vendor advocate, and that's someone who represents the vendors in that instance to sort of shall we say, herd cats or
Oh,
get people across the line to ensure they actually are all singing from the same song sheet, because you can just imagine the issues that happen when there's not alignment when it comes to selling.
especially with all the heightened emotions then as well of having to sell kind of mum or dad's house,
That's
the
right.
family home that's been there for decades. So I can see why that would lure people in with the thought of potentially kind of snagging a bargain. But you could end up right in the middle of World War III.
Yeah, but you will often see in a deceased estate, it's at a very low figure, and it will often sell at that amount. So it can be great. And as you mentioned, they can often be those sort of really sort of untouched, really old-fashioned garden, sort of orange brick houses, which I actually think are fantastic buying. So they're definitely worth looking at, but just don't be too optimistic that you're necessarily going to get the keys at that price.
Okay. Number 3, what does motivated seller mean? Because, I mean, to me, it just screams there's a bargain here.
To me, it represents a certain urgency behind the seller's situation. So basically, it means the seller may have already bought another property that they're going into, and they want to avoid having to have, a bridging loan or something on that house, and they've got to settle quickly. But it does give you an insight into sort of the desperation of that seller. So again, it's another key, if you're sure it's true, to understand that you might be able to under-deliver on that bid you're offering, knowing that seller is indeed motivated to sell.
Are any of these terms ever used mischievously to entice people in? A motivated seller, I mean, anyone is motivated to sell their property, right? Like if I was selling my place, of course I'm motivated to sell. I'm putting it on the market. Can it be used mischievously to try and attract more people, but in the end you're still going to hold out for the best possible price?
It could indeed be that case, Michael, but it doesn't actually happen very often that it is disingenuous. And I think that's because agents, to their credit, kind of hold it back for the times it actually needs to happen.
Yeah.
Which is sort of interesting, isn't it, in itself? But I guess because also an agent is really also motivated to represent the seller and therefore get the best price for a property. So it's sort of against their interest to do it. So when you do see it, I've not seen it be abused, put it that way.
Okay, so I should stop looking for conspiracies where there are none.
In this instance, yes, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Okay, number 4. This is probably my favourite on this entire list. It is the Renovator's Delight, and everyone's heard of the Renovator's Delight or the Fixer-Upper or how about this one? Imagination needed. You don't need too much imagination to know what that means.
Or worst house on the best street sort of thing, which is very subjective, obviously. Look, I love this one too because I have also seen just some utter eyesores in my time in my job. I'm talking people falling through the floors, not even the kitchen sink, literally squalor-like conditions that you have to sign a waiver to enter the property.
Hang on, you actually, as in a personal injury kind of thing, that there is a risk that a beam could fall on you?
Indeed.
Okay, all right.
Indeed. And a lot of it can happen around very old heritage houses that someone's bought and went to renovate and for whatever reason didn't. And then it might sit on the market for years and this house becomes completely neglected and derelict. And before you know it, it is completely, uninhabitable basically. So I have seen it all, and it's funny when you say Renovator's Delight, people have a sort of a vision of some sort of lovely old rambling French chateau with, crumbling wallpaper and pastel colours and unpolished floorboards.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the reality, Michael. So this is really, truly, you're going to get a bargain, but you are going to have to do so much work on this house. Go in with your eyes wide open, get a builder through the property, have an inspection report done just to understand what you are chewing off if you're looking at a house like this.
So there's a reasonable chance that if you see a Renovator's Delight or Fixer-Upper, it may be more suited to a knockdown rebuild kind of scenario.
Yes, but then that's going to depend on the heritage laws around the property at the time. But I do also think the funny thing is about a Renovator's Delight is that sometimes in a market, it's a great time to buy a renovator's delight. Like at the property wise, it's the right time to buy, knowing it will take you a year to renovate it, then flip it, and then make money on it. Now, of course, over the past couple of years, with renovation costs going up so much, people have really been spooked by properties that need renovating. So even at the moment in the current market, the brave are being rewarded for looking at renovators' delights, because most people, 9 out of 10 buyers at the moment, do not want a property that needs renovating. And the really plucky people are the ones who are bolshy enough to go, yup, I'm doing it. Or, I've got my brother and my cousin and my auntie knows everybody in the area, all the trades. I'm going to do this. So they're the ones that are being rewarded and will absolutely come to reap those rewards in the future, because I think so many Aussies at the moment are just still turned off from renovating or building themselves.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really good insights there. You mentioned heritage listings, and that kind of leads us kind of neatly into our next one. It's a bit of a catch-all, I suppose, for a bunch of different phrases and words that you might see within a listing. And it's about kind of zoning, for instance. It might be that a property has been zoned for a certain use. It's got approval for apartments to be developed into apartments, or it might have commercial zoning attached to it as well. All of these kinds of things that start to get into the technicalities of what a property can be used for, or can be done to the property. And a lot of them have perhaps red flags attached to them, because it might mean that suddenly you are competing with developers for that place, and so you're not going to get a bargain necessarily for it, or your hands might be well and truly tied in terms of the amount of work that you can do. And if you want to go in and do a knockdown rebuild, for instance, as a heritage listing, no hope.
I think this is the one where a lawyer can be your friend in this instance, of just really understanding what the restrictions are when you're buying a property with any kind of issue around zoning or overlay on the property. Because I also think getting that clarity early on, and to be honest, the agent should be able to also help you decipher what it means and who the likely buyer is, because it also means that if you've got developers, or the zoning can be for a commercial building or something, you've got suddenly commercial real estate agents kicking the tires on the property, so to speak, you're probably going to be completely blown out of the water. And ideally, you will have an agent that will tell you that in the outset, just to say, okay, this is not going to be the place for me. I'm not going to compete with developers, because we know how deep the pockets are of buyers in that instance. So I do think it sort of can helpfully stop you from getting ahead of yourself and potentially wasting money on due diligence for a property that you've never really in with a shot with. Things like heritage is really interesting, and I always really recommend that people call their local council and look at the website to understand the zoning in their area of their own property, and also the property next door to them. Because even if you're buying a lovely heritage home and you think you've got romantic ideas about restoring it back to its Victorian glory and so forth, what if the house next door can be subdivided and have a mid-level building put on it? How's that going to sit next to your period home in the future? Also at the moment, though, particularly in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, Adelaide, really all around the country, our cities are going through such a huge change at the moment when it comes to zoning. So zoning is changing right before our eyes, and there are being activity centres identified, new zoning for development in certain thoroughfares around established infrastructure. So think about it at the moment, and that's when you often also hear of neighbours butting up together and then going to an agency and say, 4 neighbours in the street, we're all aligned, we're all neighbouring properties, find us the commercial agent to sell our block of land to, knowing it can be redeveloped, for example, to have an apartment block or numerous townhouses put on it.
I love those stories. They're always so exciting to see kind of neighbours cooperating, which is rare, great. Kind of in itself.
It's great. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall at those conversations, though? I like to think, how did they get Doris across the line to do that? And what did Kevin actually have to do? Like, did he have to give her the hydrangea clippings from, that tree she always loved to get her across the line? Because people are, it's so unusual that can actually happen, that you can get that sort of, everybody's lined up at the same place at the same time, basically. However, if you've got a commercial or a developer sniffing around your property and you bundled a block together, you can be selling for millions and millions and millions of dollars if you're in the right area.
Yeah, suddenly it kind of goes from each property being worth perhaps individually 1.5 million to the 4 properties being worth as a block 10 million.
That's exactly right.
And there you go. You've each pocketed an extra $1 million just because you managed to, for once, cooperate with the neighbours and stop arguing over the fence line. The fence line doesn't matter anymore. It's going to be knocked down. So look, I love those. But look, zoning, it can be a headache. It can be a red flag, and that is, as you say, when a lawyer can be your friend to help you decipher some of those terms in that listing. So you might end up competing with developers in that case. In number 6, Alice, you might end up competing with an entirely different group of buyers instead, because we're talking about school catchments and kind of school zones around your area. And if it's a particularly kind of desirable school that you're in the area for, you might end up against dozens of other families who've got the same idea that you have.
My gosh. I mean, school zones are so hotly contested. Forget about status handbags and cars and designer watches. School zones are worth more than all of those things, Michael. And you have not seen competition until you've seen auction on a Saturday of people elbowing each other out of the way to get into certain school zones. And that's a whole other conversation for a rainy day about what people will do to get in the right school zone. Anyway, school zones on a listing is an incredibly valuable word, and that's because when you're in a certain school zone, traditionally it was always around secondary schools. The high schools were the one that people wanted to be in these sort of superstar zones of, because it's saving what can be these days 30, 40, 50K apparently in private school fees these days.
Wow.
So when you're in that right zone, you feel incredibly powerful. The risk is, though, and council can do this, they can change that zone at any given moment. And people can lose the value of their property by hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight when councils deem that suddenly the wrong side of High Street is now out of that sumptuous school zone, and it's now for the other zone. They are literally left to feel like chopped liver, and the value of their house plummets overnight.
Oh, wow. And you have absolutely no control over that.
Nothing. But look, I mean, I'm not trying to scare people off. I'm just trying to say buyer beware, I guess. So the closer you are to that school, the better. Now, the other issue it's interesting is that this is now actually happening when it comes to primary schools. So this was a trend that only really happened at secondary school level. And now at primary schools, we're seeing parents vie to get into certain zones, even at a primary school level. And to a non-school parent, you might think, well, this is Australia, aren't all schools great? And yes, we're very lucky in Australia that nearly all schools are absolutely wonderful. However, when you're sort of laying over things like NAPLAN results and all sorts of studies, and ask local parents at local park about this and they'll talk your ear off for a few hours about it, the value and the premium people are willing to pay just keeps going up and up and up based on certain school zones.
All right, so a very, very important one to look out for there. At the other end, I'm going to group a few in under the next one. Number 7, best offer, price reduced, negotiable, must sell, price to sell. All of these, they signify an element of urgency, don't they?
It's kind of like the Boxing Day sales, I guess we could say. Like it's just this big red alert of like bargain basement is here. And I think on those ones, when you're getting words like that flung about, if you want to go in and lowball, you kind of can. And you're less likely to insult someone or be laughed out of the room. Because there are times when people lowball an agent to pass on that bid to the seller and it ends up just insulting everybody and it doesn't help anyone. And I know it sounds silly to say, well, what does that really matter? But if you get that agent and seller offside, it can really work against you. So I think when you've got words like you just mentioned, Michael, you actually have full permission to do as you please, because that is really what it's encouraging, and it's trying to get everything out of the woodwork to get a deal done, and you're basically being told you've got full permission to have a crack.
To go for it, because I mean, the as you say, the seller might have already bought a new property. They might be moving overseas. There might be a whole bunch of different reasons as to why, and these are the little kind of signifiers that you've got to keep an eye out for, and it is licensed to really go for it and have a go. Number 8 on our list, sold as is. What does that mean? Is this kind of a fixer-upper kind of one as well, or is this where does that kind of fall into the category?
That really means often a property might be partially renovated. I've seen some examples of this where, like, perhaps say the kitchen's done and the bedrooms are done, let's just say, and you get to the living room, you think, I can't wait to see this. It's going to be beautiful. And you get there and there's not actually a wall, there's no doors, there's not even window frames up. And you just think, oh gosh, what's happened here? Like, and often like the builders run out of money, or the couple are divorcing and they're just completely over it and they want to get out quick, smart.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is people often say, oh, are they going to finish that? Are they going to put that wall in before selling? And it's like, no, that's it. It's being sold as is. And often it's a sort of property that sounds great on paper, but actually in reality, it is not all that it seems to be when what you've read about it. So it can be good, particularly if you've got a trade and you know how to sort of fix things up. And again, I just also think, Michael, the thing is here, though, these are all just the insights of what can help you negotiate and justify the price that you think the property is worth without feeling that you've got someone cranking your arm behind your back to sort of make you up your offer, and you can actually say, well, no, the living room is not even here yet, mate, or the bathroom isn't even tiled or something. So it is actually a good one, that, and it's one we often see a little bit more of during times of recession or something, when people are really going under and like builders are being really impacted quite sharply.
So it kind of goes back to what we've spoken about in previous episodes. It's about all the research that you need to do before making an offer. And this is essentially doing your research for you, because the information is right there in the listing already. So you've already got an insight into the state of the seller, kind of what position they are in, and potentially information that you can use in your offer. Number 9, our last one on this list. This, I don't know which way this one goes. One of a kind. When I hear that something is one of a kind, instantly I think, oh, this sounds fancy. Like, I reckon it's going to be architecturally designed. It's going to be spectacular. It's going to maybe have a turret. Who knows? Is that what we're talking about here, or is it the other way and it is just a hole in the ground?
I think that real estate agents would love to hear that you actually respond to that, Michael, because that is what they're trying to do. They're trying to entice you in and say, wow, fantastic, so unique. I read it in a very negative way and think it normally means something that no one else wants. And it literally sticks out like a shag on a rock. So buyer beware. I
didn't know where you were going to go with that one just then. High risk.
But I do think that sort of house is normally so unique, and the thing that will work in your favour is therefore there is less likely to be a number of buyers on it. And it also means it's often harder to sell, because properties like this are incredibly unique, individual, etc., and they're quirky. So they're the ones that people walk in and go, oh, I can't even get my head around this. So anything like that will most likely have a smaller pool of buyers on it than a more generic property, which is going to go in your favour as the buyer, just to say, well, there's not any competition here, mate. Like, you've got to accept my offer, because that's basically all you've got. And it plays right into your favour.
Alice, I reckon we put together a fairly comprehensive list there. It's bordering on a dictionary of real estate terminology here. We've got mortgagee and distressed sales and deceased estate, motivated seller, renovator's delight and fixer-upper and imagination needed, zoning and the subject to council approval, all of those ones in that basket, including heritage listings, school catchments or school zoning, best offer, price reduced, negotiable, must sell, price to sell, all of those ones that signify, hey, maybe it's okay to go in with you. Potentially lowball offer. Number 8 was sold as is, and then number 9, one of a kind. Thanks very much, Alice.
Pleasure, Michael.
That was real estate expert Alice Stolz, National Property Editor at Domain, and I'm Michael Thompson. Make sure you're following the podcast, and we'll be back next week with another episode of The Property Pendulum, brought to you by Domain and Fear and Greed, the podcast that tells you which way the property market is going to swing and how to make the most of it.